Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Total Soccer Show. I'm your host, Taylor Rockwell. I am recording this on Tuesday afternoon as the Champions League is happening and dramatic things are happening on screen. I will leave it at that because I don't want to spoil anything, but I will say that we're aiming to be back tomorrow with a recap or a discussion of what happened in the Champions League. We'll see if this game holds up being as exciting as I think it should be. Right now, it seems like it will, but that's for later. For now, for today's show, I'm going to be speaking to our friend and yours, Mr. Jason Davis. He's here to discuss his new podcast, Miscellaneous FC. You can find that wherever you find podcasts. The logo has MISC FC in the front. It's very pretty. But we get into why he wanted to launch that podcast and sort of the opportunities it affords him that the Sirius XM show he does not. But we also look at some of the topics they've discussed. Wanda Nara and Mauro Icardi up front for sure. But then like the brilliance of Mario Balotelli, the evolving understanding of Josie Altidore, lots of other topics in there too. And then we also focus on sort of the varying ways of covering soccer and sort of the approaches to talking about soccer, discussing it, and trying to keep topics semi-fresh, at least. I should say up front that there's it's not a lot of who did what this weekend or who scored what goal or which team's going to win MLS Cup. So if you're looking for that, I would say listen to my conversation with Paul Tenorio from yesterday or even our MLS previews from last week. But for now, it's a long and, for me at least, enjoyable conversation with Jason Davis. Hopefully it was for him as well. Hopefully it will be for you all too. So I will just say over to me and Jason talking about all those things that I just said we're going to talk about. With me now, I've got Mr. Jason Davis making his, quarterly appearance on the Total Soccer Show. Is that what we're working towards? You were on in Chicago, now you're back on in March?
If you'll have me quarterly, Taylor, I will certainly appear here on Total Soccer Shows quarterly. Absolutely. Let's sign that up.
I may have just given away how little I know about things like quarters of the year, because I think if you've been on the show January and March, then you've been on twice in one quarter. So I guess we're having you on 8 times a year. I hope that's fine. Okay.
I think that's twice quarterly. Or is that bi-quarterly or semi-quarterly? Taylor, which one is it?
We're off to a high-flying start, is what I have to say to that. Yes, Jason, back on the show. You're with us in Chicago, as I said. We're going to talk a little MLS later on, but I wanted to talk to you primarily about the new podcast that you've got going, Miscellaneous FC. First off, I wanted to know, am I calling it the right title? Because I know it's like MIS FC or MISC FC, but I don't want to get it wrong. So first off, is it Miscellaneous FC?
It is Miscellaneous FC. But I think you can abbreviate Miscellaneous, MISC, and also that's much easier to spell for me. And yep. when I'm doing podcast information and all of that, so whatever you call that, descriptions, it's easier to put MISC. And plus, I think it looks cooler. I don't know. That's the thing these days. It'll look better on a T-shirt if we ever have a T-shirt.
I mean, it will. It's a nice logo, but it's so nice that I was kind of looking at it like, well, what should I call this? I think you called it Mish FC on the last episode very briefly.
Mish.
So you've got Mish FC.
I want to pronounce that. Yeah. I figure it's kind of like, since we're treating it like an FC, it's a football club, and I'm American, I know maybe it should be SC, who knows. And if you're going to go, if you're going to call it a football club, then, lots of clubs have shortened versions of their names. Why not Mish FC for Miscellaneous FC?
That makes sense. And it feels like thus far, I think a good majority of the content is coming from Europe. So maybe FC does work. But for those who aren't familiar with the podcast or haven't heard it so far, what is the content? What is the structure? How is that podcast working?
Okay, I think it's important. Well, I think it's necessary for me to kind of give a little background as to where this came from for me. Because, okay, look, I do a soccer radio show 5 days a week on Sirius XM, and it's American focused, but I'll drift, I'll drop a little Champions League in there. I'll talk a little Mexico sometimes. Obviously, we talk about the international game, even outside of the U.S. men's national team. So and that's primarily news based. I mean, it's daily, right? So I have to kind of be leaning on whatever's happening in that moment. And it's about soccer, and it's about results, and it's about tables and standings and signings and all of that stuff. And that is the main reason we care about this sport, because we like watching it. Otherwise, why are you here? But there's so much other stuff, and you could call it weird, you could call it wacky, you could call it extraneous, you could call it miscellaneous, or whatever you want to call it, that sort of surrounds the sport. And I was listening to this podcast, and I heard a guest, and he said, I do an NBA podcast, but we don't talk about the games. We talk about Twitter emoji wars. We talk about dance things. We talk about beefs. We talk about fashion. We talk about whatever, all the stuff that's around the NBA. And it's a super rich field. And I was like, why isn't somebody doing that for soccer? Like, why isn't somebody talking about all this weird stuff that happens in soccer or around soccer or the drama? Like, we spent a lot of time in the first 3 episodes of Miscellaneous FC talking about Wanda Nara and Mauro Icardi, because that is a crazy, fascinating story. And if you're not in an Italian soccer bubble or you're not Argentinian, maybe you don't know what's happening there.
So I want to get to Wanda and Mauro because I have questions, but I did also want to ask about Peter because I wasn't familiar with Peter. Was that like a pre-existing relationship, or how did you all come to start the show? How did he come to be on the show himself?
So I have a history of working with people remotely. Best Soccer Show with Jared Dubois was remote. I did, Soccer Morning was by myself, and every guest was via phone or via Skype or whatever. And I kind of thought, hey, it would be really nice to be able to do a podcast with somebody in person, looking across a table or just sitting next to somebody, because I think there's a lot of nonverbal cues that you get, and you know this from your relationship with Daryl, that it's a rapport, you feed off of each other, and so I wanted to do this with somebody in person. I unfortunately didn't have anybody obvious that I thought I could turn to. I mean, I know a lot of soccer people in DC, but a lot of them are they're very busy or they have other stuff going on. And I was like, okay, well, I want to find somebody that maybe doesn't have as high a profile, or maybe isn't already doing this for a living, who might want to do this. And so I asked around. I asked some people, who, and I had heard of this podcast Across the Pond. In fact, I think maybe I did an appearance on it a couple years ago. And I got recommended this guy. Hey, why don't you reach out to Peter? He's DC. He's on this podcast Across the Pond sometimes. He's a soccer fan. He knows his stuff. And I was like, okay. So I met with him for beers. We talked through like a lot of stuff. We went through all this before even Mauro and Wanda was a thing. We were talking about the fact that Memphis Depay wants to be a rapper. Did you know that, by the way?
I did not. My piece of trivia when it comes to Memphis Depay is that when last I checked, he was married to Steve Harvey's daughter. So Steve Harvey is his father-in-law. That's my insane Memphis trivia. But that makes me not surprised that he also wants to be a rapper, because if Steve Harvey's your father-in-law, there's probably lots of other crazy stories in your life, I'd say.
Exactly. So the fact that Memphis Depay is Steve Harvey's son-in-law and he wants to be a rapper. And so we talked, and we haven't even mentioned Memphis Depay in the podcast yet, in 3 episodes in. So at some point we're going to have to get to that. But that was kind of the jumping off point. Like, there's all this stuff that's happening around soccer. And if you do a quote-unquote serious podcast, or you're covering the results, because people do want that. They want analysis on the results. They want the game breakdown. I mean, again, you guys are doing a killer job of that. A lot of shows are like, well, I want to talk about the Premier League results. Nobody's really spending 15 minutes on Memphis Depay wanting to be a rapper. And maybe they shouldn't in their context. But if you build a show around that whole idea, okay, why wouldn't we talk about that for 15 minutes, or talk about Wanda and Mauro, or talk about hashtags on Twitter for teams that, good or bad, and sort of do the review, or talk about statues or whatever. I'm looking at the list for our next episode, and I always feel like, oh, maybe we're not going to have enough. And then we have 12 topics by the time we get to Tuesday, because there's so much stuff happening in the world. It's cool. I think it's fun. It's a chance to riff.
I am very familiar with that. Like, is this enough of a show? And then suddenly realizing, like, oh, we have 2 hours worth of content. So yes, that makes sense to me. But I'm surprised to hear you say that, like, you and Peter didn't have like much of a relationship before it really got going, because it does feel like you all have very, very good chemistry. But it does also feel like there are those moments where I can tell, like, maybe there's a little bit of a lack of familiarity there. So is that a thing that you all are kind of figuring out on the fly? Do you have conversations afterward about, like, ooh, like, how do we want to, like, tweak this or adjust this?
Yeah, it's like that for sure. I don't know if you know this about me, Taylor, but I can be domineering in a conversation. I can be a little over the top and loud and talk too much.
See, you say that. That is not a characteristic of you that I would say I have seen all that often. I feel like you're a very good listener, personally.
I appreciate that, but I'll tell you what. I'll tell you this. Pulling back the curtain. So listening back to episode 2, I think maybe. By the way, episode 2 we did remotely because there was a snowstorm in DC and we just couldn't get together. So maybe that one doesn't sound as smooth. But I was listening back to one, and my wife is in the car and she doesn't know anything about the topics. She's a little bit of a soccer person, but not much. And she's like, you need to let him talk. You have to let him say something. And I'm like, oh, okay, well, maybe I do need to back off. And that's the thing I need to learn about how we feed off of one another. And what I've learned very quickly is Peter is an organized person, and he's got like he's got the topics listed down, and he's got he wants to go through these things, and he wants to branch off. Okay, when we talk about statues, like we're going to do this week. When we talk about statues, we're probably going to talk about the David Beckham statue that got unveiled in LA. But we'll talk about other statues around the world, or players that should have statues, or players who shouldn't have statues, or whatever it is, whatever comes to our mind. But he'll have that down, and I kind of have to let him be the one driving the show in that case, because otherwise I'm going to just kind of be meandering all over the place. And although I'm used to being the person leading, this is a new one for me. I got to let him do it.
So, yeah, actually, I wanted to ask that. We can get real for a second. The printer in the background is making noise. That's how real it wants it to get. Because, like, I listened to the first episode, and there were moments where I felt like you're so used to hosting your own show and doing it by yourself, as you said, that it felt like it was like you were getting used to the idea of not having to, like, be the straight guy who was leading the show, but sort of, like, having more of that, like, kind of riff back and forth. And it does feel like that's been sort of an evolving thing where you've, like, I think the last episode I listened to, you were like, all right, what you got for us this week? And you kind of let Peter take it. And that was, it was an interesting evolution to see how I feel like you're like, you're taking a little bit less control of the reins, which I have to imagine is new, but maybe also slightly frightening to be like, should I be talking now? Is this dead air? I don't know what's happening anymore.
Yeah, it's a little bit like that. I mean, I have to remember podcasts are different than live radio and I've done podcasts enough, but I think I always treated it as radio where you got to fill every single moment. And I'm even learning on the radio to say, okay, I can pause here. I can let this sit. I can let this linger if I've said something interesting, or I just got to collect my thoughts. And I think it's regardless of what. Okay, I'm not going to say it's great or anything with me and Peter yet. I that's for people to listen and decide. But I do think that it's interesting for me to do it, and it's not just like, oh, well, this is an exercise in finding something different just to find something different. I do think that the show can be fun, and I do think there's something to be built off of this, and I do think Peter's funny, and I think there's lots of reasons to do it. But for me, it's also like just switching chairs for a little while every week is cool, because I don't get to do that very often.
Yeah, and I do think like having the person sitting across from you, it helps because it kind of brings out the like enthusiasm, and that's the other thing I can tell is like you guys are just kind of like having fun. Like it's not a sort of oh, we got to talk about this, we got to talk about this, and then it's sort of like, all right, well, I guess we're done moving on to that. Like it sounds like we've heard this before about our show, and it's one of like my favorite like moments of praise. So I guess I found a way to toot my own horn there. But it's like it sounds like I'm listening to a conversation that you all would be having anyway, which I feel like is kind of what it should sound like if it's just two people kind of riffing back and forth. And it feels like you all are kind of getting that down. So well done there. But I then want to ask, how do you come up with that content? You said you've got a list in front of you, or like a list for a running order for the next episode. Is that something where you all are just kind of going back and forth? Like, did you see this? Have you heard about this? Or are you getting content submissions as well?
We're not to the point of content submissions. I don't think the listenership is big enough for that. I mean, this is a slow build. And that's, by the way, that's the other thing about this is it's been a long time since I launched a podcast, and it's been a long time since I cared about looking at the numbers of anything. Mm-hmm. And so it's humbling to go, and maybe my haters listening to this will be like, oh, it's because you suck. But, it's humbling to look at the numbers and go, oh, that's how many people have listened to this show. That's not that many people. Mm-hmm. But I also enjoy the challenge of trying, and that's why I'm here. That's why you've been kind enough to have me on Total Soccer Show, so I can tell people about it who might not otherwise. And I'm learning, like, okay, what are the channels for spreading the word, and how do I build to that, and how long is it going to take, and all that stuff. And I think it's, that's filling a creative void for me. That's making something that's actually available to everybody rather than a radio show, which I love doing, but you have to pay $12.99 a month or whatever to get that. So I think that's sort of part of this. In terms of what we do for the content, we've worked out a pretty, slapdash system where we have a Google Doc, and it's just whatever you see, you throw up there, you put a link so the other person can go and review it. And that's where we're at. And like I said, it's not even taking that much work. And at first I worried, like, am I following the right Twitter accounts? Am I following the right Instagram accounts? Like, where am I seeing everything? But if you go to a couple of websites, if you pay attention to Twitter like I do, which is 75% of my day I'm looking at Twitter, it's all on some level, you'll catch the stuff that's big enough to go, oh, that's interesting. Or you'll catch something that becomes the germ of an idea to spread out. So it can be something that isn't that big of a deal in the moment, but oh yeah, that means we can talk about this other X thing that happened 3 years ago, or remember when Mario Balotelli ripped his shirt off at the Euro, whatever it is. You know what I'm saying? Like, it could just be something that kind of builds from there.
So I call it like what I'm about to ask you about, like the Wikipedia black hole. But like, how much research do you have to do, or do you have like a cutoff point for yourself? Because I think with me, if I started reading about like the Wanda and Mario Balotelli situation, like I wrote about it for The Athletic this summer, and I went like way too deep because I was like looking at the nuances of like, well, like he said they weren't actually that good of friends, but then is it Maxi Lopez? Is that the husband? Yeah, like Maxi Lopez said they were best friends, but like Mario said they weren't. And I'm sure there's gray area. What is that? And then you can kind of go too far down that where you have too much information. That's why sometimes my prep documents for the show are about like 6 pages longer than Daryl's because he can kind of wing it. I'm wondering, like, for you all, how much research are you trying to put into this, or are you just sort of reading the one story and being like, all right, let's react to that story?
I think it's kind of that. It's kind of the latter. I mean, I want to treat this like somebody who's like casually following all this stuff. I mean, in some cases I am casually following this stuff. And I don't think it needs to be like, I don't need to become an expert on every nuance of Moro and Wanda and Maxi and the kids and not making the World Cup team and why. And I don't need to become an expert about that. I need to know what's going on, sort of the basics of what's going on now. And it's funny, you mentioned that. Peter kind of filled me in a little bit more on the history with Maxi Lopez, stuff that I wasn't fully aware of. And that I think in the moment that actually adds to the discussion that we're having or that we're learning about it together, me and the audience. And then because if you can't presuppose all knowledge on the part of your audience, right? Like you just can't assume everybody knows everything. And if that's the case, well, why not have somebody in the moment kind of go, oh, wow, are you serious? And because then that's natural rather than, yes, I know all about Maxi Lopez saying X and Moro saying Y, and Wanda going on television that one time when she, I don't know that you need to know every single detail of that, but I think that also it is sort of now there's connective tissue for the show and for soccer fans who might not know about this, and it becomes this thing that you follow throughout. I do like the idea, as much as this is random stuff, and we're going to talk about statues or Spurs Stadium or stuff that's a little bit more maybe has a little more depth, like the U.S. Women's National Team with the names on their jerseys during the England game, that kind of stuff. While there's that, and those are sort of independent of each episode, I do like the idea of like a story that kind of goes through like what happened to Moro this week, what did Wanda do this week. I like that idea.
I like that idea as long as it doesn't become the like we've got to find something crazy he did, because I always go back to I misidentified last time, but it was like Manny Ramirez, and when there was the whole obsession with him being weird and being out there, and then it was sort of like, oh, he answered his phone and said hola, and everybody's like, oh my god, that's so nuts. And it's like now you're trying to kind of forcing it, but I also like I appreciate that your approach overall, because I do think, and like it's a thing that Daryl and I have found, is that when you're sort of presenting yourself as like the authority, like I know all this stuff about the Mario Wanda situation, then people might be listening to you as you're the authority figure, I'm getting information, and then if you get something wrong or you misidentify a person, then suddenly you're going to hear about that. But if you're having a conversation that like is fun, then you're going to hear like the fun responses to that of like, oh, and did you see this, or what about this quote, as opposed to like, well, actually he got that tattoo in 2010 instead of 2011, and like then suddenly it's a different narrative. So I think that's the smart approach. But I'm wondering, like, is that the one, though, that has given you the best sort of recurring content so far? Because they do seem to be doing lots of sort of headline-grabbing stuff every single week.
Well, it's just, I mean, even if there's nothing major. By the way, to that point about looking for something, and, I did favorite a tweet, or I did find some story that says that Moro favorited something on Instagram or liked something on Instagram from a Juve player, so that obviously means he wants to go to Juve. Like that's the kind of stuff. But I also think that that's funny because, yeah, that is overreaching for like what does this say about Moro's situation at Inter? But it's also like we can talk about that in a meta context too. We can talk about how Italian fans or how people following the saga or how soccer media in general cover this. So now it becomes a wider thing of, remember that time when Mario did X and the media in England flipped out, or how Raheem Sterling gets treated, like stuff like that. And then it becomes a bigger discussion, and now we're kind of not just talking about Moro anymore. We're talking about this bigger thing. And as much as I like to kind of wallow in some of the nonsense, there are some serious discussions to be had about some stuff like that, which I think is also possible within the show, even if we are kind of just having some fun and making jokes on a lot of this stuff.
Much more from Jason still to come, but first I wanted to let you know that today's episode is brought to you in part by SeatGeek. Getting tickets online can be far too complicated. There are hundreds of sites, varying levels of reliability. It's hard to know who to trust, and sometimes even if the site looks really trustworthy, that then makes me suspicious because I'm like, oh no, you look too professional. I don't know about all this. You don't have to worry about that with SeatGeek. SeatGeek pulls millions of tickets into one place so you can easily find seats you want for a price you're willing to pay. Obviously, this is airing in the middle of a conversation with Jason Davis. We don't get into soccer too much. We talk about a lot of like the coverage of soccer, not necessarily games. But if you wanted to attend any Major League Soccer game, there will be tickets available on SeatGeek. Even for like the biggest ones, even for MLS Cup last year, you could find those tickets on SeatGeek. If you are a baseball fan, opening day is coming up. I was looking up prices to different games. Not surprisingly, the Atlanta Braves at the Phillies game is slightly expensive. I'm assuming that's because the Phillies have to find some way to finance that absurd Bryce Harper contract. I might be saying that because I'm nominally a Nationals fan. But either way, you can use SeatGeek to get tickets to concerts, sporting events, theater, any sort of live production. If there are tickets to be sold, they can be found on SeatGeek. And it makes it really easy, as I said, but it also makes it sort of confidence-inducing because you've got the color-coded system that tells you if it's a good value, it's a bad value. You can see where they're going to be in the stadium or the event, the arena, what have you. So it makes it all that much easier. Best of all, our listeners can get $10 off their first SeatGeek purchase. Just download the SeatGeek app and enter the promo code TSS today. That's promo code TSS for $10 off your first SeatGeek purchase. Thank you very much to SeatGeek for sponsoring today's episode. Remember, folks, SeatGeek, life's an event. We have the tickets. Now, back to my conversation with Jason Davis. So I'm assuming then you're not going to get like too serious when it comes to Wanda and Mauro, but the brief story there for people who like haven't listened or aren't as up on it is what basically Mauro was friends to some extent with Maxi Lopez. Right. Maxi Lopez was married to Wanda Nara, I believe it was at the time. They had kids together. She eventually has an affair, or I think if you listen to Mauro's version of it, it's like, oh no, they were separated, then we got together. Either way, they're now together. Mauro Icardi has Maxi Lopez's kids tattooed on him. It's a bit of controversy. Wanda is also his agent now, which led to, I think, your most recent show. I don't know where we definitively landed, so I wanted to ask you, is she a revolutionary? Because I know you all were kind of going back and forth on that one.
Well, look, I do think she's got a point about a woman being in a men's world and sort of men and you know what I know about Italian culture, what I know about Argentinian culture, and I'm not an expert, and I would definitely say I'm not an expert. I would put that out there first, but there can be that macho element. She points to it. I think it's fair to say Wanda Nara is doing things and challenging men in ways that they're not usually challenged by women, and that's certainly interesting to talk about and valuable, and has she's taken agency of herself and her husband's career. But yeah, all that other stuff in the background and all this other stuff in their backstory makes it all hard to pin down. Like, is she really doing is she really fighting the feminist fight, or is she just being opportunistic? Like, did she do something really shady by cheating on Maxi with Mauro? Probably, but who knows? Personal relationships are weird and icky. That's why it's fun to talk about. And look, there's certainly a level of, okay, now we're delving really deep into people's personal lives, and that's too much. But at the same time, as they continue to put themselves out there and be front and center publicly, then it's kind of like, okay, well, look, if Wanda wants to go on television and talk about this, or if Mauro is posting on Instagram and taking shots at people, then okay, well, I guess that's all fair game, right? And even if we can say, well, we don't know exactly how it went down between Mauro and Wanda, there's no doubt she was married to Maxi Lopez. Mm-hmm. There's no doubt that Mauro got his kids tattooed, Maxi Lopez's kids tattooed on Mauro. I guess that's like Jerry Springer level stuff.
So with that in mind, then, I think that you should really embrace it and maybe have her be your agent for your next round of negotiations with Sirius. I don't know how you make that contact, but I feel like if you get Wanda in there, I think it can only work to your benefit.
I think so, probably. I mean, she seems to be a fighter for sure, and and look, and I think that's even part of this too, right? Is as much as the easy place to go is Wanda's this and that and gold digger and all. That's easy, right? But that also comes from a misogynistic viewpoint in a lot of ways. So we get to open up that question. Okay, well, is it really fair to call Wanda that is if she fell in love with Morrow, if her relationship with Maxi was on the rocks, and that's the way it's being portrayed by her and Morrow, and now she's happy and she's taking control of her husband's career, and he's on board with this, then who's to say that any of this is wrong from that point of view? But then you get into the tricky element of, okay, well, now Inter fans have turned on Morrow because he doesn't want to be there anymore. They stripped the captaincy of him, and now we're talking about the stuff that actually impacts the performance of the team on the field, which is the reason that we're all here in the first place. And but it just illustrates that this game, that the sport of soccer is as much soap opera, telenovela as anything else, and we're kidding ourselves if we don't think that that's part of why it's the biggest sport in the world.
That makes sense to me. So then, are there people that you enjoy talking about more than others? Are there some that you just find like naturally engaging or interesting?
That's a good question. I think Mario Balotelli is going to come up for the first time ever on this next episode.
The selfie?
Yeah, the selfie situation. Which,
is it a full-blown situation now?
Yeah, it's a good question. Is it a situation? I don't think there's anything wrong with it necessarily. The only thing I would say, is, being a rules guy, is, okay, did you delay the game by doing all this stuff with the camera or the phone and then posting and all of that? But I also think it's also that thing about, okay, this is the modern game, and if you're a footballer and your career could end at any moment and you got to make as much money as possible and your brand is part of how you make money, and you're Mario Balotelli, he may not have done it for those reasons, but some players are thinking like that, then, why not do it? Why not be part of it? Yeah, I don't know. Situation might be a strong word, but Mario, I think, is going to become a favorite of the show. He's a favorite of mine. I love Mario Balotelli for lots of different reasons. Let's see, where else would we maybe go? I don't have any. I don't think there's.
Let me ask you one more about Mario then, because I'm now fascinated. He gets linked with MLS clubs all the time. Which MLS team do you think would give you the best material if Mario Balotelli ended up there? Like, where would you most like to see him go in Major League Soccer?
Oh man, wow. I see. So I would say the Red Bulls because of the market but they're kind of a boring team now in a good way. They're boring in a successful way, and he would be sort of the anti Bradley Wright Phillips. But that actually could work, because then you have yin and yang there maybe in New York if they decide to go to a system where they can both play together. And now we're talking about something pretty exciting. I really don't think NYCFC is the place for him, even though that's the he's in the cities in New York. I don't think LA. Where. So I guess. If you threw him into Colorado, is that really going to be is that going to be good for Mario's career? Is that going to be good for Colorado? I don't know. So this is the thing. What you're asking me is, do I want him to go somewhere? Well, you're not asking me this. I'm going to change it to this question. Do I want him to implode somewhere, a bad situation, so that we get lots of things to talk about that way? Or do I want him to thrive, and where can he thrive? And then hopefully a happy Mario Balotelli is also giving us reasons to talk, right?
Yeah, well, see, I think the model for this, strangely, I feel like the model for a new MLS signing should be Wayne Rooney. Because it's like he's a player who has like good and bad baggage coming with him. He's got this like crazy reputation from his like actual playing experience, but then he's also kind of got a crazy reputation from his off the field experience. He goes to DC, they're successful, he scores goals, he makes big plays, then he also gets arrested at the airport for maybe being drunk. And it sort of is like he gives you both of those things at once. He makes it a dramatic talking point on and off the field, which I feel like is kind of what benefits you in terms of both of your shows. Right.
Yeah, that's true. I think if Mario Balotelli came to Major League Soccer, I'd want him to score goals. So it's a matter of, okay, who's going to get him the ball? Instead, how about this? How about I know they have Dom Dwyer. I know he set up the equalizer in MLS Week 1 for Orlando City. But hey, maybe Orlando would be a place for Mario Balotelli. Maybe he could be the one benefiting from Nani's work on the wing. I mean, it's something.
It is, but I feel like you've now set it up that I feel like he's got Inter Miami written all over him.
He kind of does, though.
He really does.
Yeah, I think that.
Which makes me sad, though, because I do think if he ended up at NYCFC, like, I can't – actually, I guess it's good that he could go to Orlando, because I can't imagine that Alexis Guerreros would do anything else but try to get Mario Balotelli on their show or some scenario where he could meet him in person. And I feel like that could end in like an arrest for Alexis, so maybe having him not in the same city would be good.
Well, I think there would be a race. I really do, between some of us, getting Mario Balotelli to either come on our programs, our podcasts, do something with Mario. I think everybody, and that's the gravity of his personality. I mean, I do think that, there's a purist perspective on this. Okay, well, Mario has had problems off the field, and he's been a malcontent, and do you want a prima donna? And but at the same time, like, again, if you recognize that the sport is both what happens on the field and the drama of everything else, and the personalities, and without personalities, MLS is too boring and doesn't grab enough attention between games, then you should want Mario Balotelli to come here. And again, regardless of what happens, I would be wishing him the best, because I want him to score goals. I think that would be fun. But even if he doesn't have a good time, there's a chance we're getting some good stuff to talk about with Mario Balotelli.
Yes. All right. So let's make sure he gets here eventually. I'm sure when you get Wanda as your agent, maybe she can also make that happen too. When you going back to like the soccer that you are watching for a second though, like how are you then watching the games? Because you've got Major League Soccer starting again. You've got all the action in Europe still going on. That's a lot of soccer to keep track of for like the various shows that you're involved in. So are you watching for tactics? Are you watching for narratives? Are you watching for individual moments? Like what is the thing that makes your job the easiest?
Okay, I think you've asked me this question before, Taylor. I think it's a good question, though.
Well, that's why I want to ask it again.
Yeah, it's a good question.
Did I see this in Chicago?
I think you did.
Yeah,
as a matter of fact. That's okay. I
was either sick or hungover, so combine those two things, and it impacts memory.
You watch more soccer than I do. I'm pretty sure of that. How do I say this? Okay, so unless I'm writing specifically on that game, unless I'm doing player ratings, unless I have to have something concrete to say about it, I tend not to watch games. I tend to watch games more as a fan than as an analyst. And that's because I think I'm better at distilling games from a fan's perspective than I am from an analyst perspective. I'm not going to sit here and say I'm the best guy to break down tactics. So why ram my head up against that wall, especially when there are other people that are better at it? And again, you and Daryl, why should I do that? Why not sort of do the big picture narrative stuff? And that's kind of always been my perspective. I've always been a narrative guy, and I'll acknowledge that sometimes narratives get forced, but that also gives me the opportunity to puncture bad narratives, or to say, hey, our conventional thinking on this is probably wrong, or we're jumping to a conclusion, or the things that we think lead up to X conclusion, we're missing 3 of those, and let's hold up, and again, small sample size. Like, how many big conclusions can we draw about MLS teams right now? Well, 0. Now, it's not fun to say that, but let's talk up to the point where we have to say, okay, that's enough. Let's wait for week 2. Let's wait for week 10. Let's wait for week 15 before we actually say anything about these teams in a serious sense.
How difficult can it be for you then, like to change your opinion of a player or a team or an incident? Because like with the way, like the shows that you're doing, I feel like that lends itself to sort of getting stuck in like an entrenched mindset, which is really difficult to then get out of. So how do you keep yourself from sort of, I always go back to like some of the TV shows that like would be on when Fox had the Champions League, like before and after Champions League, every show was like, is LeBron the best? Oh, is Kobe the best? Is Michael the best? Like it was the same conversation over and over and over again, and the same people arguing the same stuff. And I feel like once you start talking about that stuff, it's really easy to just say the same stuff. Apparently, it's really easy to ask the same question twice in 3 months. How do you avoid that being the case? How do you avoid getting kind of just stuck into one narrative?
Well, I think being conscious of it is first, you have to be aware. Okay, hey, this is a trap that you can easily fall into. I mean, yeah, it's definitely a thing. 100%. It's like, Atlanta United is the best team in North America. Maybe not that far, but best team in MLS.
It's DC United right now, by the way. Transitive property. Adam Stavely taught me that.
I have them number 1 in my power rankings. And I'm already. Yeah, I mean, look, they're probably not the best team, but again, coming out of week 1, how do you make those judgments? Why not throw them up at number 1? They beat the champions, right? As you said, transitive property. So, look, I think, first of all, it's being conscious of it. Don't, I don't know, just be aware that it's easy to fall into that. Don't be conscious of groupthink, right? Don't just follow what everybody else is sort of saying. Look for either dissenting opinion or consider the alternative. And I think I've said this before. I think one of the things that I'm good at, one of the things that makes it possible for me to do a show by myself, is that I'm more than willing to flip something over and look at it from the other side and talk it out as if I'm defending that position. I mean, the classic way to say it is that I'm sort of my own devil's advocate. And I do that. I'm not saying I'm perfect. I'm not saying that every single case I consider every single perspective and I absolutely come to the most just conclusion. But I actively want to say, okay, this is what I think immediately. Well, why do I think that? Well, what about if I think about it from another perspective? Or what if I consider the variable that I cannot account for? What if I don't know what happened in the locker room? What if I don't know if that player's carrying an injury? What if I don't know what that player was asked by his coach and he looked terrible? Well, if it's the system and not just the player, and I think I've talked to enough people over the years to have that sort of baked in now. Like, I've talked to enough players and they'll tell you, look, yeah, and this is why I hate doing player ratings, but I do them because they're fun for people to talk about. Because I don't know every single thing that's happening with the plan. I don't know everything that's happening with the tactics. I don't necessarily know how everything is being adjusted to on the field or how the communication is working, even if I can go back and watch and say, okay, well, they're clearly playing this system. They want to get this player into these positions, but was that always the plan, or was there something that changed? Or again, I mean, you have to use the evidence in front of you because that's all you got, but you also have to consider that you don't know everything.
So, but it appears like you know enough to know how to do player rankings, or ratings, which is something that I've never been very good at. How do you have a system in place for that? Like, I've seen different people do different stuff where some will just like start with a 5 and then they go up and down based on what the player does in the game. Or do you take that route, or do you just sort of assign a number at the very end based on your recollections of the game?
No, I start them. I ever start everybody at about 5 in my brain. I don't like ticking down. I'm not actively making notes like, oh, you're a 4 now. Oh, you're back up to a 6. Like, I'm not doing it that way. But everybody sort of starts off at a base level of a 5, and then I'm doing notes, and largely it's about moments, right? So it's about, I mean, it's on the ball and off the ball. You have to consider off the ball, otherwise you're not getting a full picture. But it's mostly about moments because, first of all, we're watching on television when I'm doing these things, so limited picture, can't know where everybody's position is on the field in a given moment. If something comes, I mean, if you're a winger and you get the ball in space and you're 1v1 head up with the defender and you cross the ball into his feet, I mean, that's obviously not what you were supposed to do, so you should be knocked for that. But at the same time, if the ball turns over, not because of your making, but if the ball turns over and you track back 60 yards to make a tackle, well, that's a plus. That's an event plus, right? And I try not to be too rigid about it, but I want to have okay, these are the big things. There's 7 because, it's 90 minutes and I'm not going to get every single thing a player does, and I'm not going to be able to track every single movement, and I'm filing after the final whistle, not after a rewatch. So, you kind of just say, it's imperfect, but here's as close as I'm going to get.
And do you have set valuations for, like, do goals count a certain number of points or get you a certain uptick in form?
No, I think it's more sort of nebulous than that. It's like, okay, and then I'll ask you, Taylor. I mean, you don't say you're not good at ratings, but if you watch a striker play 88 minutes of crap soccer and just isn't good, can't hold the ball up if that's part of his responsibility, turns the ball over, hits 2 or 3 good chances wide, but scores the winner in the 89th minute, how do you judge that, right? Like, should I give that player a 4 because overall, man, he was crap? Or do I say his job is to score goals, he scored the winner, he gets a 6, he gets a 7, he gets a whatever. Like, how do you do that? I mean, again, it's sort of just, you're just kind of throwing it up there, and it's just what your gut says. Like, how do I judge this position versus that position?
To be honest, it's why I was never good at writing those types of articles, because I can do it on the show by sort of saying, like, yes, he scores this goal, and it's a really great moment, and he's got the technique, and that's really impressive. But that doesn't necessarily override, like, blah, blah, blah. And then but that, if you put that into a paragraph, it's like, it's a page for one player's rating, and it gets really hard to condense that down to, like, scored a goal but was bad otherwise.
This is why ratings exist, though, because I'll say, oh, he's a 7, he had a 7 because he scored the winner, even though he's crap for 89 minutes, and somebody else will go, well, he was crap for 89 minutes. Why did you give him a 7? And I don't think either one of us is wrong, right? There's no hard and fast thing, and soccer fans like to act like there's a black and a white, but it's obviously not. It's one of the things I talk about all the time when people ask me why soccer. When somebody in my regular life, my civilian life or whatever, says why soccer? Why do you love soccer? Why do you watch soccer? Why do you talk about it? And I go, because there's so much subjectivity built into this sport. Because goals are a number, assists are a number, but there's so much other stuff that you can't judge that way. And I know we're getting better with statistics and advanced statistics, and I'm glad that we are, because I do think we should be measuring these things. But at the same time, I can watch a game and go, wow, that team played pretty good today. Like, whatever it is, over 90 minutes, I thought they were pretty good. And somebody else can say they were garbage. What are you talking about? Yeah. And again, neither of us can be none of us is 100% wrong. I mean, maybe if you find the ultimate authority on the game, I mean, if we want to let Pep Guardiola decide every single team's performance on a rating of 1 to 10, maybe then, if we all agree he's the arbitrator, but otherwise we're going to be arguing, and that's what I love about it.
Jason and I still have lots to talk about. We will be doing that shortly. But first, I wanted to say that today's show is brought to you in part by Hims, a one-stop shop for hair loss, skincare, and sexual wellness for men. You can find all of their products and everything they have on offer at forhims.com. One of the things they help you deal with, as I said, is sexual wellness, sexual performance issues specifically, which are more common than you think. That's a recurring thing with Hims, is that they're kind of helping people get access to medicine for issues that are far more common than people might like to think or might realize, but because they're embarrassing, we don't really talk about them. There seems to be a stigma around them. It might be baldness, or in this case, it might be erectile dysfunction. Over 25% of new ED cases are men under the age of 40, and 40% of men by age 40 struggle from not being able to get and maintain an erection. So Hims has you covered, and they have you covered in a way that doesn't require you to go to a doctor. You don't have to sit there in the waiting room and then awkwardly try to explain things. I mean, when you call to make an appointment, you don't have to say, like, oh, yeah, I'm there for a different reason, because it can be kind of awkward to tell a stranger that you're dealing with issues, and you don't have to do that with Hims. They connect you with real doctors and medical-grade solutions to treat ED. They offer well-known generic equivalents to name-brand prescriptions. That means no snake oil pills or gas station counter supplements. Nothing you're getting from Hims is coming in like a bright pink package with a snake on it or anything like that. And as I said, there's no waiting room, no awkward in-person visits, no lines, so you can save hours of your life and hours of awkwardness by going to forhims.com, and you can try Hims for a month today for just $5. They'll get you started for just $5 while supplies last. See their website for full details, because this would cost hundreds if you went to the doctor or a pharmacy. So go to forhims.com/totalsoccered. That's forhims.com/totalsoccered. forhims.com/totalsoccered. Thank you very much to Hims for sponsoring today's episode. Now, one more time, back to Jason Davis. The one that I'm like increasingly interested in, and I haven't talked to Daryl yet about this one, but it's something I would like to do, is like I want to watch a game because there are a certain few players that tend to come up on our show who we will hear, yes, he's great, and we will hear, no, he is terrible. And it's kind of, there's no in between. And I would like to watch a game and have like, I don't know, like Daryl be very caffeinated and have gotten 12 hours of sleep the night before, and then like approach it with a, you think that he is great, and I am like not going to sleep and not have any coffee and think he is terrible, and see if we watch separately. I wonder truly how different our perspective on that game is going to be, just given that sort of natural mindset. And that's a thing that I want to do because I think that exists, and I do think then that would help me be like, okay, really got to try to approach this game from a more neutral standpoint, because if I think, oh, that guy can't control the ball, if he controls it 9 times but doesn't do it that one time, I'm probably going to focus on that one time.
I think you've just come up with a study for somebody's doctoral thesis. I think you've done that. I mean, and I do think that all of that stuff, I mean, whether it's interesting to talk about is up to the individual person, but I think that stuff is there, and I think built-in bias is a major part of everything that we do. I mean, I just think bias is part of life, and recognizing where your bias lies, it can lead to two things. It can either lead to an actual correction, like, oh my gosh, I'm biased in this particular way, I got to be aware of that, and I'm now correcting for it. Or you can swing the other way, right? You go completely opposite and go, well, I recognize my bias, and now I got to, that player's great suddenly, and my bias was that he was bad, and that was built on whatever supposition, and now, oh, he's 100% great, and then you become entrenched in defending that position. And hey, that's part of the job too. That's part of what we're trying to do day to day when we talk about these things. And again, where else in life are people being judged like this while they're on the job by people, making podcasts or doing radio shows? And it's kind of a head trip when you think about it.
Is there one like player or team or anything like that you have sort of found yourself changing your opinion on from like one point to another, or is it a bit more fluid than that, as you've been saying? I guess I'm wondering, like, is there somebody that you initially thought like, oh yeah, they're great, and slowly thought maybe they're not that great, or vice versa?
Wow. Okay. So this player comes to mind, and I'd have to talk through my journey with him. But Josie Altidore comes to mind because he creates such division with people. He is that player. You said some people, he's absolute trash. He's terrible. Get him off the field. He shouldn't play ever. And some people say, you know what? This is one of the best strikers in Major League Soccer. And nobody's putting Jozy Altidore on world class or anything like that. I mean, obviously, I think it's within certain parameters. But there is definitely a division on opinion on Jozy Altidore. And sometimes I'll watch Jozy and go, oh, my God, like, first of all, Jozy is a damn good passer of the ball. So I noting those things, I come in with that expectation. And when he does, it's like, yes, see, Jozy can pass the ball. It's not just about how many goals he scores. It's not just about his work rate. But then I'll go, wow, man, maybe his work rate could be better. Like maybe Jozy could pick it up a little bit. And then I'll come back to what we talked about earlier. And I'm thinking, okay, is Jozy out there being asked to be the first defender? Is he asked to track back? Is he being asked to run to a spot? Is he being asked to make those runs, or is he being asked to hold position, to draw defenders, to do whatever? You know what I'm saying? Like, and that's the journey with a lot of players, but Jozy's the one that comes to mind.
All right, that makes sense to me, and I appreciate that because like that is the thing that I think Daryl and I both try to do on our show is not just be like, oh, he can't control a ball, oh, he's so bad, and I think we have a few where, like, the one that I would say that I'm actively trying to see from a different perspective is DeAndre Yedlin, because I think Daryl has always been sort of frustrated by the focus on his speed over maybe his lack of technical precision, and that's a thing that I've like slowly come around to. But then, you know, like we get those tweets every time we mention him in a negative way, because sometimes I think it's justified, but maybe sometimes it's our bias. We'll hear from people saying like, yeah, but he's starting for a Premier League club. Like, what other American defender is doing that? There are very few, if any. And so when you think about it from that perspective, it does make me then think like, well, maybe I am just sort of letting my bias come into the equation. Unfortunately, I think the two times I've thought that and really focused on watching him, he got a red card and he like turned his back and missed a cross. So there are those moments too.
Challenge. Yeah, he didn't meet the challenge for you. Didn't step up. And let me ask you, I'll flip this around a little bit. Do you think that there's I'm sure this can be true of Daryl too, although maybe comes from a different place. But do you think that there's an innate bias for certain Americans, whether you're doing a podcast or writing? I think is probably it crystallizes a little bit more. But being harder on American players, I'm not saying DeAndre Yedlin's the best example of this, but being harder on American players because we don't want to give off the impression that we have an implicit bias in a positive for an American player.
I think for players of a certain age, yes. I think for younger Americans, no. I think it's a weird line where, like, strangely, Pulisic is kind of treading this line right now, in my opinion. That, like, I think you'll have certain players who continue, like Bobby Wood, for example. He's playing in the Bundesliga, he's getting regular minutes, but he's not really having that much success. He's not scoring as many goals as we'd like. And I think because he is a little bit older than somebody like, I mean, he's significantly older than Josh Sargent, but like, if Josh Sargent were doing what Bobby Wood is doing, we'd probably be very excited because there's that age difference, even if he weren't scoring. And I think that you look at some of the other players, like Fabian Johnson, there are still people who will say, like, we mentioned that maybe he could do the Nick Lima role, and we got a bunch of people being like, what are you talking about? This is the guy who plays, you know, all the time in the Bundesliga. That guy should be doing his role. And I get that idea, but I think that it becomes a sort of, what have you done for me lately? Okay, yeah, you're still playing in the Bundesliga, but that's what you've been doing. You haven't moved on, or you haven't elevated your game, or you haven't become indispensable. And I think there is that sort of, I don't know if it's bias, but I think that's the way we approach Americans when they play abroad. Whereas I think if they're younger, we get really excited and we just want to see them play for the national team. If they're scoring goals in the, I don't know, Swedish Premiership or the Allsvenskan or whatever it is, then like we get really pumped up. But if that's a 28-year-old scoring in the Allsvenskan, I think we're probably less enthusiastic. Okay,
that's a good point. I mean, you also bring up something I think is interesting in this idea of bright white lines between leagues and quality, and then as you've referenced a couple of times, that natural assumption, okay, because that player's in the Bundesliga, well, he's obviously better than anybody in MLS, even though that's probably not true, and it's a matter of circumstance. But how do you judge? And again, it's not up to us really; it's up to Greg Berhalter for the national team or people recruiting for clubs. But how do you judge that? I mean, just because Bobby Wood is in the Bundesliga, does that mean that he's better than the best American option in MLS, whoever that is at the moment?
Yeah, and I think the other thing then is that like the broader, forgive me for how pretentious this is about to sound, but whatever, I'm rolling with it. Like I think the broader of a brush you attempt to paint with, the more trouble you're going to get yourself into. Because the other flip side I've seen is like, or is MLS way better than we think? Because like Miguel Almiron is tearing up the Premier League, and Tyler Adams is coming in starting right away for RB Leipzig, and really maybe maybe it's better, but just because two people are doing well doesn't mean that we can then kind of like change the entire narrative. Like I think there's also that inclination for a lot of fans is to sort of then have like the next hot take or the next way of approaching it, whereas it can be, as we say on the show all the time, like things can be two things. Like you can have some players in MLS who probably could be playing and succeeding elsewhere, and you have some players playing in Europe who probably wouldn't do that well if they went to Major League Soccer, and vice versa. And again, things, I guess in that case things can be four things, but I think the more general of an approach you try to take in understanding a player or a team, the more like I guess difficult it's going to be to actually come away with a unique take.
Yeah, this is one of the things I love about what you guys do is that, and I'm not going to say you've trained your audience. That kind of takes agency away from your audience, but you've gotten people to accept that, to realize, okay, I don't have to make I don't have to make a determination one way or the other necessarily. I can talk this out. It can be, again, a thing can be two things, that there is some subjectivity in this. There's some the black and white doesn't have to be that. It can be gray. And because I think, and I just saw somebody, the guy who recommended Peter for Miscellaneous FC, actually, Justin Salhani, he said on Twitter this morning, he's like, he was quoting somebody who said, saying you don't know is not fashionable. Mm-hmm. And I'm conscious of this too. And I wonder, and because I do radio, I don't know if it's different. And I think about this sometimes. There's this natural pull to make a strong statement, to say this is true or that is true, and to not be in the middle. Because whatever, this is the nature of our culture now, certainly with sports talk and everything else, it's all hot take culture. But man, sometimes I just don't know. So and sometimes I don't think there's anything wrong with admitting that you don't know. But then you get into this trap of, okay, does an audience want to hear that? Does an audience want to hear you say, man, I don't know. This could be both things, or this is tough, or this is subjective, or this is gray. I don't know about that. Mm-hmm.
My genuine answer to that is that I think it comes down to like authenticity and honesty. That if you have watched a game from start to finish, or if Daryl and I have watched a game from start to finish and then rewatched it, and we still can't decide, was this a good tactic? Did the manager get it wrong? Then I feel like that's okay as an answer. It's okay to say like, well, this kind of worked and this kind of didn't. But if you're just sort of watching the highlights and then reading somebody else's coverage and then saying like, no, it definitely didn't work, or as like to your point, like I don't know if it worked. Like then there's a difference between I don't know if it worked, but having the research to say why you don't know versus not doing the research, so then you have to say I don't know. And I think that's a big part of it, because I think for me, now I'm going full pretentious, but whatever. Because I think for me, like what I go back to is that like I don't really like debating sports. I don't think lots of people do. I think about if I'm at a party and a person who's on Fox Sports or whatever channel who's screaming about LeBron as the best of all time, do you want to talk to that person at a party? No, because you don't want to have that person yelling their opinion at you. Or like it either necessitates you just saying like, okay, I guess you're right, or then you have to yell back. And I just think that's not what people really want to hear. And so I think people would, in my opinion, or maybe that's like what you mean, like what it goes to with like the audience that we have is sort of, I would rather hear people in a sort of relatively calm, occasionally emotional, but relatively calm setting, discussing why they feel a certain way and having like either counterpoints to that or disagreements about that. But like there's a big difference between having a conversation where two people disagree and like debating who's the best. That just kind of doesn't do it for me.
Yeah, I think I said this again. I'll go back to our conversation in Chicago. I think I said something about waking up in the morning and being in a fighting stance now. Yeah. Mm-hmm. As just part of who we are as a society. And I think it's good. And this is part of the reason I wanted to do Miscellaneous FC is because we get to talk about stuff that ultimately doesn't matter and have fun with it. And I'm not arguing. I'm not debating. I'm not like, well, you should have played a 4-4-2 instead of the 4-3-3. I'm not doing that. I'm coming at this as, okay, this is a fun thing to talk about. What other fun things are there happening in the soccer world? And it's that decompression, it's that release, and it's like, okay, well, it doesn't have to be contentious all the time. I mean, you guys have established that. on the Total Soccer Show, and I'm glad that we have those outlets now because so much of sort of what sports has always been. And while I do think it's okay to sort of be aggressive sometimes and to not necessarily be kumbaya, I don't necessarily think it has to come from this starting point of, oh, we're always fighting about things. We're always debating. We're always battling. It's not there can be no consensus here. Like that's kind of the attitude a lot of sports talk has.
Yeah, and that's why you and I are, I guess, like to them singing "Kumbaya" right now. But I'm cool with that.
With you anytime.
So you've got. I wanted to ask you like one more question about like how you kind of approach games from a like multiple shows standpoint. Like MLS this weekend, was there stuff that you sort of watched and said, I'm definitely going to talk about this on Sirius? And was there stuff that you saw that you were like, I'm definitely going to talk about this on Miscellaneous FC? Like, are you watching from those two different lenses at the same time?
No, not yet. Maybe I will. I think so. Miscellaneous, the rule is no scores, no standings, none of that, right? So it's kind of like it's the anti-soccer show or the anti-football show in a way because it's not about what's absolutely happening on the field. So I kind of compartmentalize that. Okay, I'm watching MLS, first of all, because I'm a fan of MLS and because it's my league and all of that, but I'm also watching it for things to talk about on the radio. And then everything else, like anything Miscellaneous FC is just going to come at me. Now, if a player does an incredible celebration or a player after the game, is caught, making out with his girlfriend or something and it's all on social media, okay, that's going to get into the show. I don't know why that example, but that's going to get into Miscellaneous FC, but not because I'm watching for it, but because I'm going to hear about it later because it's going to make the rounds on Twitter or whatever. So that's where I'm at right now.
And what are you looking forward to talking about this week or on the next show? Like what are the biggest things that you're kind of pumped to get to chat about?
Well, okay, so I don't know if you saw this video. Did you see this video of Jesse Lingard and Marcus Rashford?
Yes, I saw it because you tweeted, does Lingard think they're in the Matrix?
Yes. I mean, I
love that video so much.
It's hilarious. It's just these two guys who are obviously very close friends, right? Yeah. They're mates, right? They're buddies, and they're coming up at Manchester United together, and it's this video where Marcus Rashford is telling the story about how they were hanging out or they were in the locker room or something, and they were looking at the media guide, or I don't know what it was.
It was like the match day program, I think.
Yeah, the program. And Marcus Rashford or Jesse Lingard's looking at this, and he tries to get Marcus Rashford's attention. He's like, Rash, is this us or whatever? Like it's a picture of them celebrating a goal or something. Yeah. And Marcus, what are you talking about? He's like, how do you know it's us? And he's like, because it's us. And Jesse Lingard goes on this weird. I mean, if the guy wasn't high, you would think he was high. It was like that. It was like.
It was. And it was especially interesting because at first it felt like I thought he was trying to say, like, in a very sweet way, like, can you believe this is us? Like, we're both from the academy. We wanted to play for this club our entire life. And now here we are on the match day program, like, celebrating a goal. And I was like, oh, I get that. But then it was like he starts, touching his face and being like, but how do we know that's us? And it was like, okay, now you really are going into, like, what if I'm not me and you're not you? But that is how we appear. I don't know. It was great. And I'm very excited to hear you all talk more about it.
Yeah, I think it's going to be fun. I think that's definitely on the list. There's a bunch of other stuff. It's going to be good. All I ask is that people check it out. It might not be for everybody. And again, if you're like coming at the game and you want more tactical breakdowns, I get that. Again, I think that's obviously interesting. It's part of the reason that we watch the sport. And if you care about the scores and the reviews, I mean, all of that. But there's so much stuff that's sort of like culturally interesting and just fun, and it connects to the game. So, there are celebrities doing crazy stuff all over the place, but I don't necessarily care about celebrity culture. I care about soccer culture. So when we got Moro and Wanda and we got Jesse Lingard and Marcus Rashford making very spaced out videos, that stuff is fun for me.
Now, I do have to ask, because I know you have, like, the relationship with the Cooligans. Like, is there crossover there? Like, do you all have to, like, kind of go back and forth on who's talking about what that week? Because there's a little bit of that, like, I feel like they like their crazy moments. I feel like y'all may end up talking about some same stuff.
Look, I mean, flat out, I'm not a comedian. Peter's not a comedian. We're not claiming that this is professionals doing this. And the Cooligans are professionals. I've seen both of them do stand-up. They're very funny guys. I think there might be some
Christian is professional. Alexis is there too.
Wow. Let's get back to them. That's definitely going to get back to them. Now, I mean, those guys are great. And full disclosure, I reached out to them when I was starting, and I was like, "Hey, I have this idea. What do you think?" Because I respect them as as soccer people first, but also as, funny guys, and if they thought there was something to the idea. So I didn't, and I don't think there's any requirement to do that, but since I have that relationship with the Cooligans, since I know those guys, I didn't want to step on them. But I don't think it's, I don't think the crossover is so much that you're going to be like, oh, this is just like the Cooligans. It's definitely not. It's definitely not the Cooligans in any way, shape, or form. And what I also think about this is another thing, and I think, you can consciously think about it and maybe be a little methodical about it and a little deliberate about it, or you can kind of just let it happen. But every show gets its own community and its own culture and its own in-jokes and its own pieces that tie people together. And for the Cooligans, it's Gully and it's my guy and it's all that stuff that they do that you identify as a Cooligan fan because you know that stuff. And that's kind of what I'm hoping for with Miscellaneous FC, that we build those community elements. I mean, whatever it is, and that'll be different. And I hope the shows complement each other. And even if we talk about something that they talk about, that it's it's going to be different enough that you'll be like, oh wow, I didn't get enough of that story. Let me hear it again.
So do you then plan to begin every show with "Yeah, baby" as well, just to make sure that you can stoke those fires right away?
No, but what's funny is I tried to figure out how to start the show because I have an intro for the radio. And I now I feel like it's a rut, and do I need to get out of it? Do I need to change it up? And what do I say? And how do I say it? Do I say welcome? Well, okay, that's been done. I can't say hello and welcome for sure. I can't step on that. I can't say, yeah, baby. I can't do that. I mean, nobody can do that like Alexis Guerrero. So I don't know. I'm working on it. There might be a new, slightly different intro every week. So listen.
Yeah, I feel like variety is the spice of life. It feels like that suits that show. But I look forward to it. If people want to find it, when do the new episodes drop?
Thursday morning. We record Wednesday. They drop Thursday morning. Should be there for you in iTunes and Stitcher and TuneIn, I think, and Spotify. I did that one. And Google Play Music Plus. I don't know. It's everywhere you get your podcast. It should be. Is that a place you can get a podcast?
No, I don't think so. I'm just trying to list as many difficult places as possible to make your life that much more challenging.
It's in a lot of places. It's wherever, I think. Although you guys probably have some premium deals I don't know about, right?
I mean, in the sense that we pay a lot because we put out so many shows, yes, that is a thing that happens. That is, yeah, especially during the World Cup when we're go twice daily, 2-hour-long shows. Yeah, we run out of our allotted data real fast.
Oh, yeah. By the way, I am definitely looking forward to the Total Soccer Show schedule for this particular summer. We got a Gold Cup, we've got a Copa America, and we've got the the Women's World Cup. So you guys got lots of stuff to do. I'm excited for it.
That makes one of us. Yep, you forgot the U20 World Cup that also precedes all that. Yeah, it's gonna be. It's going to be a time. Nothing will ever beat the 2016 was the Centenario, and then also the Euros, because that was we had the Euros in the morning, 3 games from 9 a.m. until whenever, and then we had Copa America that night. So we basically just never left the studio, and I'm looking forward to that again.
This is why I'm committed to talking about players' cars and haircuts and not happens on the field.
That makes sense to me. Otherwise, you have to get a pull-out couch in your office, which we do in fact have.
I love it.
There we go. All right. Well, Jason, thank you very much for coming on the show. I look forward to future episodes. I've been enjoying every one. I've listened to all of them so far. So thank you for the show, and good luck with it.
Thank you. Love you, buddy. Appreciate it.
You too, buddy.